Okay, Professor Krush here, and today we're going to go over one of my favorite still lifes to introduce to students, typically as a first still life, because it picks up on the fundamentals that we've already been learning, covering principles rendering a sphere and rendering a cylinder. And this is what the actual photo looks like. The photo is not that good. It's too high contrast from the printer. The photo that's on my, that's in for students with me in Blackboard is a really nice photo to work from. But if you notice, yes, we have a lobster buoy. We have some beautiful rounded Montauk rocks, and there's a little piece of worn driftwood there, and there's drapery in the background. The star of our show is, yes, this wonderful lobster buoy. I tend to collect them because I find them when I'm walking around fishing, and sometimes they're worthy, and this was kind of a pretty one. Why this is so good? Because you're combining all those things we've been talking about. If one was to look straight on, okay, I'm trying to look at the camera at the same time to my left, you can see that it's a perfect circle. If you're looking lengthwise at this, it's a cylinder. It's a cylinder that tapers. It's a cylinder that gets rounded into a bullet shape, okay? But that's part of the fun, because here is where we're taking advantage of things that are round, kind of like the sphere, and here's where we're taking advantage of things that are the cylinder. So what happens with this is foreshortening. Here's a straight on view. As we start to tilt this thing, you start to see more of the side. As you see more of the side, that circle becomes an ellipse, and there's tremendous foreshortening. If you were to take a snapshot of this and trace over it, you would see that it would go very, very short distance from the front to the back because of all that foreshortening. Even if I had this set up this way, students tend to draw it like this because your brain is saying this is this long object. So we're going to be somewhere in the middle where I want foreshortening, but we're going to see a lot of the side. So again, as you can see, as you go down the side of this thing, the more that you turn it, the more this thing becomes an ellipse, a narrower ellipse on the side, along with the circle on the inside. And the more you start to see the length, and you start to see more foreshortening, but a longer length. And as you get almost to the bottom, notice you barely see the side. And that would be a very, very, very narrow, tight ellipse that would define that side, along with the little hole, same ellipse in the inside. As you get flat, what happens? Kind of like the cube or whatever. If we look straight on a certain way, we're not seeing side. So we're only seeing the side, we're not seeing the top or the bottom. So we're compromising where we're somewhere kind of in the middle. And while I'm not going to draw this, I just want to go over some principles that'll be helpful as you folks are drawing it. Here's a little overview of what I just talked about, where it's a straight on view. Slight side view. Notice the tremendous foreshortening. If you draw something the first time that has a lot of foreshortening, you're going to really have a tough time in your brain. You're going to think something's wrong. You're going to be so tempted to push it out further and further because your mind is saying, yes, this is a long object. But remember, foreshortening, these angles come in and they don't go back far, because we're seeing most of the front, and we're only seeing a little bit of an ellipse start to happen there. Okay? As we see more of the side, we're going to see less of the front, and it's going to become a narrower ellipse. Okay? And then we've arrived here where we're pretty much doing for the project, where we're seeing a lot of the side, but we're still seeing part of the front. So we get a fairly narrow ellipse, the ellipse repeated in here, and we get to enjoy the whole, a lot of the length of the side. Okay? And in this illustration, and this is all in the step photos, you get to also see the core in here. You get to see the highlight on the top. We get to see some reflected light in here, and we get to see a shadow. There's also a shadow cast by this little piece of rope. So that should help, and at least in terms of trying to understand what happens to get narrower and narrower. If we remember, if we barely saw the side, you would actually have this super tight ellipse, okay, with a little another ellipse in there, and we'd be seeing almost the whole length. Okay, notice how this is becoming longer and longer than the ones previous. We'd be getting this long length with this ellipse wrapping around, and that ellipse shape repeats in here. You can see there's an illustration where I'm showing that in the step-by-step ones. So if you continued a dotted line there, you would see there's the other part of the ellipse. So just because this is squared, this is like painted in half, this is gray paint and it's white, doesn't mean that as you go down you're not going to follow that ellipse. That ellipse is exactly in line with the same one in the front. So there's another little trick. And the big illustration, here's the ellipse. Here again is that ellipse repeated, but we're not seeing through it to see the other side of that ellipse. All right, so to draw this, some of you tend to want to draw things large. I don't want you to draw things too small, but this roughly is maybe 2.5 inches from here to here. Overall length is maybe like 4.5, 5 inches. And remember, this is for you, for your steps to be able to attack this problem, but I do want you to look directly at the still life, which you have a beautiful photo of that you'll be working from. So these are just all things that govern how you're going to go about it, even in your observation. So you have this ellipse here that's fairly narrow. It's repeated here. Okay, it's a small version of it repeated here. A lot of times students make this hole a little bit on the small side. There's this piece of rope that kind of comes out through here. Okay, I don't want to get too caught up in the rope, but if you notice, there's a little bit of a dark thing going through here and then repeated at the bottom. What is that? That's the core. For all intents and purposes, this rope represents a long curving cylinder. Okay, so just like when we study with the cylinder where there's a core, same thing here. The only thing that makes it a little bit more interesting that it's rope. So you have these curved edges to the outside of it and the other side, and that's why I have here, you have these kind of S shapes that join these things together that give this feeling of wrapping around and being a rope. So it's not totally straight, you know, not straight, but it's not just one line on the outside. It's a bumpy line because you have the little parts of that rope that stick out as little curves. All right, so moving on. Again, this is just meant to be an overview. If you get this ellipse down and you start to go down here, it's all rounded, but this tends to feel kind of straight, and then it pinches in, which gives us that bullet shape. All right, you can do two ways. I usually prefer students to do the core and then afterwards go in and lay in a little extra tone, which is kind of separating this as being gray and this as being white. I'm much more concerned that you're getting this core and you're getting the sense of form. I'd rather not even see the transition of this gray versus white if you're missing out on what the core is doing. All right, so here's your shape. Here's as it pinches in. You can just keep drawing and erasing till you kind of feel like you have it right. If you drew a straight line down here, it is kind of equal on each side. It's matching whatever happens here, obviously, is also happening here. So we have that. So as you're building it up, keep adding tone, keep making it a little darker, and try and get it centered where you're finally seeing this core through there. There's some little bit of tone on the side where light is missing. Once again, this is also a light source. That is this 45. Okay? So there's a little tone in here. It gets a little bit lighter in here where there's some reflected light. Remember, there's also reflected light down here. Later on, I'm even adding a little bit of texture because this thing's kind of, you know, it's been around. This thing's been beat up somewhat. So it's nice to capture. I wouldn't go crazy with that. Again, I'd rather have you not do it at all if it's going to start getting in the way of really seeing the form. So you could do it toward the very end of the drawing. You could do limited things of some little cracking or whatever in here in terms of the of that texture. I have scars. The word, if you wonder what that says, scars, texture. So so that's it. This is what takes us through here as we're building it and shading. It's all an exercise in just gradual gradation of trying to get that core, trying to help define the shape. Where is the light? Where is the highlight? Highlight is through here. Not seeing the highlight quite as bright here because this also has some tone on that side. But notice that it is brighter here than here and here. And of course it's very bright here because that's also white. I've, toward the end, added some tone as a background. Now you could add tone all the way around on this one when you're doing the actual still life and you're looking at the stones and the piece of wood that are all part of this. This would be one that would be nice to put in some tone back there. And once again, why? Because these lines fall away. Rather than see these lines that construct this whole thing, if this tone goes right up to that edge, now I'm seeing the shape for what it is. If this if there's strong lines here, some of you in making strong lines, you know, as you go up to that edge, that line is going to disappear. And the beauty is that we're going to see this again for what it is. We're going to see the shape, we're going to see contrast to define it, and we're going to get a really nice sense then of how light is at work there. Okay? In addition to that, the only thing I want to cover is a little stone here. I don't have one handy, but the stones are kind of simple. They're like egg shapes. They're round. They're not perfectly round like the sphere, but they have the exact same principle. So here's the shape. Here's where we're building up some tone and we're getting at a core. Here's some reflected light at the bottom. Here's the highlight where it's brightest in the middle. And then since it's this kind of cool granite or whatever the heck it is, beautiful rounded rock from Montauk Point, I'm adding some little speckles in here. Keep it on the light side. If you start adding any kind of texture, any of this, just do a hint of it. Do not start covering the whole thing with dots. It's totally going to get in dashes or cracks. It's totally going to get in the way. This is a study in form. So I'd rather have you not do some of that textural things if you're going to overdo it. It would be better to just really see the form for what it is. And then toward the end, again, if you want to punctuate and just have a little hint of some of that texture, some of that cracking that's going on in there, you know, go for it. But again, less is more. Our eye and our mind will fill in. It'll say, oh, we see a little cracking. We get the sense that this whole thing is kind of old. We're not doing like a 5-hour rendering where we're going for, you know, real serious realism with this. We're doing this as a 1 to 2 hour drawing to understand form. So I'm going to try and end this. I tend to go on a little long sometimes on these. I'm just trying to see if there's anything that I've missed. Most of this, by the way, is something that you have to define by eye. I have distance by eye with a little dotted line here. So when you have this ellipse and it's going out, you have to do the best you can to kind of estimate. If you were doing this as a real subject, you could be holding a pencil out and saying, well, how high is that versus how long? Is it like 2 times the height? No. Is it maybe like 1.5 times that length here? Roughly. Maybe a tiny bit more than 1.5 points from here to here versus going from here out to the end, whether you measure it from here or measure it from here. But there's no system I can give you. You have to do that through observation. You have to make a good judgment, a good assessment. I have a little line there that bothers me because that was from one of the earlier photos where it said highlight and it's pointing to this area. So what I'll do, I'll kind of turn it into a crack. Okay, so just reviewing if there's anything else. I think that kind of covers everything that I wanted to do. For students in my VIS 101 class, you also have the luxury of a bunch of step-by-step drawings that arrived to build this whole thing. So I'm going to cut out, and good luck and enjoy it.